Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's lecture on inequality in housing and wealth. The learning goals for this chapter are: what are the historical reasons for housing and wealth inequalities in the United States? When and how did residential segregation become a characteristic of US cities? What is the extent of wealth inequalities today in home ownership and beyond? And what factors are perpetuating and exacerbating wealth inequalities? So last time in the previous chapter, we discussed income and labor market inequality. But wealth is a different concept that goes beyond just income. It's a concept related to income, but it has significant differences. It includes the sum total of a person's assets minus their debt. And it's something that's usually built over a lifetime and passed on to the next generation through inheritances. So if you come from a family that for generations has lived in poverty, then that helps explain some of wealth disparities that exist because you haven't been able to benefit from inheritances. Whereas families that have been able to have assets and significant wealth, and that includes anything from just having a house that you can pass on to your children, then that makes those folks better off when it comes to wealth, because they have something that's been passed on to them that they didn't have to necessarily work for. Assets are defined as cash in the bank and the value of all property, not only land, but also houses, cars, stocks, and bonds, and retirement savings. So where does this disparities in wealth come from? Well, by 2016, the top 10% of the population in the United States controlled 77% of the wealth. The racial wealth gap refers to how Black and Latino families own just 9 cents of wealth for each dollar white families own. And again, this is wealth, not just income. Here you see an image that captures some of the wealth disparities that exist, so that the top 400 extremely wealthy individuals has as much wealth as 15 million Hispanics, Latino households, and 16 million African-American households. So you see, again, that significant difference between Black and Latino wealth and mainstream wealth. Now, as the reading discussed are historical reasons for the wealth gap, which go back to what happened after slavery. In 1865, Congress established the Freedmen's Bureau and the Freedmen's Savings Bank, two initiatives that were designed to help formerly enslaved people establish financial independence. General Sherman issued Special Field Order number 15, which set aside land for former slaves. By the end of 1865, President Johnson had ordered the removal of former slaves from the lands and returned the lands to their former owners. In 1872, Congress dismantled the Freedmen's Bureau. By 1874, the Freedmen's Bank failed because its all-white trustees issued speculative loans to white investors and corporations. 60,000 Black people lost most of their savings. So you see, in a very short period of time, laws and initiatives were instituted to try to get formerly enslaved people to begin to have some financial independence, but very quickly that was taken away. There have been 3 forces that have led to residential segregation. There have been collective racial violence carried out by whites, practices created and reinforced by the emerging real estate industry, and federal housing programs that were made available almost exclusively to whites. So throughout the 20th century, racial violence was used to intimidate African Americans from moving into primarily white neighborhoods. They engaged in cross-burning, window breaking, and organized mobs to keep Black people in segregated neighborhoods. As the real estate industry began to emerge, racially restrictive covenants were created as contractual agreements that prevented the sale or lease of property within an area to non-whites. Steering was another practice that was used by which real estate agents showed homes in white neighborhoods only to whites and Black neighborhoods only to Blacks, which perpetuates, right, desegregation in those neighborhoods. The Federal Housing Administration, which was a government agency that was created in 1934 to improve the economy and in particular the construction industry. The Federal Housing Administration also made it possible for people to get home loans from banks with small down payments and low interest rate. However, the FHA in their manuals created the system of redlining neighborhoods of color as undesirable neighborhoods. And therefore, if you wanted to get a home in those neighborhoods, you weren't being approved for a loan. And those loans for homes in these areas would be denied. This meant that homes owned by white families in suburban areas increased in value more rapidly than those owned by Black families in Black neighborhoods. So this means then that even if you inherit a home from, let's say, your African-American grandparents in a Black neighborhood, the value of that house is going to be less than if you inherit a home that's in a white neighborhood. Some of the contemporary housing inequalities are explained by some of these issues. And look in some of these ways. Predatory lenders targeted Black and Latinx homebuyers with high interest loans. This was particularly during the early 2000s. Less than a third of whites, one study found, are willing to move into a neighborhood that is evenly split between whites and Blacks. And realtors continue to use discriminatory practices, such as not showing certain neighborhoods to Black homeowners or requiring them meet financial qualifications before showing them homes. So these are all practices and beliefs that exist today that continue to uphold segregation in housing. And here is a graph demonstrating neighborhood segregation today, where you see what the neighborhood looks like, where Asians live, where Hispanics live, where African Americans live, and where whites live. So you see, for example, where whites live, a large percentage of the people who live in that neighborhood are white, and very tiny percentages of the people who live in those neighborhoods are Black, Hispanic, or Asian. Whereas where Black folks live, you see there's a large number of Blacks, smaller number of whites, Hispanics, and Asians, and so on. Here, again, you see this discrepancy in terms of median household wealth between white and African Americans in 2016. You also see the Black wealth gap is as wide today as is what it was in the 1960s. So even though there's been some up and down in terms of wealth, there continues to be significantly lower wealth among African Americans than among white Americans. You also see this at every educational level. So often we are told that one way to gain wealth or to get out of poverty for African Americans and other people of color is to go to school, right? If you get an education, your economic condition will improve. And that may be true for some folks, but what we see here is that there's still a wealth gap between people who have an education, a college education, whether they're African American or white. So there's still a significant wealth gap. For example, you see here, in terms of a bachelor's degree, an African American wealth is around $100,000, whereas a white person's wealth who has a bachelor's degree is significantly higher. So you see, and even African Americans, their wealth doesn't increase by that much, but it's a significant jump for white Americans who have an advanced degree meaning you have a medical degree, a law degree, a PhD, so on. And here you see average cash on hand in 2016 based on education. Again, you see those discrepancies. And Black home ownership is in retreat, as you see here, where we have a home ownership rates by decade and race. So you see, again, these discrepancies, regardless of what your education is. It may improve your conditions from where you were before, but compared to white Americans, there's still a gap there. You also see this in terms of gender, where you have married Black women versus white women who have no bachelor's degree, depending on their age, again, sort of what their household net worth is. For single women, you see, again, significant discrepancies, but with a bachelor's degree, you see, again, for African-American women between the ages of 20 and 29, for example, if they don't have a bachelor's degree, their median household net worth is $4,000. With a bachelor's degree, it's $7,700, which is, of course, an improvement. But when you compare that to the white person with a bachelor's degree, the white woman in that same age group with a bachelor's degree, there's still a significant gap there, right? So the reading talked about 21st century wealth gap and what are the things that are contributing and may continue to contribute to some of these discrepancies. And these are years of home ownership, which are impacted by the fact that Black families don't purchase homes until later in life, household income, years of unemployment, what level of college education you have, and inheritance or financial support from families. And again, as we mentioned at the beginning, assets include retirement benefits, and white people are more likely to have jobs with benefits that include retirement plans than other groups do. So that also contributes to the wealth gap, whereas white individuals who have access to these retirement plans are able to retire and have living income, whereas for many people of color, they don't have retirement plans at all, or aren't able to save as much in those retirement plans. And so retirement is a much more challenging option for certain populations. So in conclusion, wealth inequalities are entrenched and complex. Wealth provides opportunities and allows families to invest in their future as well as take risks. And many activists contend that it is time for the federal government to enact new wealth generating programs that, unlike past programs, are not exclusive to white Americans. Like, for example, when we discussed about the Federal Housing Administration, which was a federal government program, but again, it kind of made it easier for white populations to be able to benefit from those programs than African American or other populations of color. So this ends our lecture for this week. I will see you guys next time.